From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Here's what's coming up. From the Livestock Marketing Information Center, Jim Robb provides this week's insight on the cattle markets. Among other things, Jim will review the latest USDA beef export data released last Friday. Then Sarah Moyer talks with K-State's John Gonzales and Stephanie Kruger about their work on increasing muscle mass in poultry by way of an egg treatment before hatching. Also, we'll hear from former U.S. Secretary of Agriculture Dan Glickman upon being awarded an honorary doctorate degree from K-State in ceremonies last Friday. And on this week's 4-H segment, Sarah talks with K-State's Deryl Waldren about the 2019 Kansas 4-H Ambassador Training. All that right here on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
This is Agriculture Today. Thanks for tuning in once more. And we turn now to the director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center out in Denver for this week's observations on the cattle market trends. Jim Robb is with us once more. Jim, we have quite a few positive nuggets to share on the markets from last week, and then we'll get into some USDA beef export figures that were just released and other topics. But the cash-fed cattle trade, finally, at very week's end, did finish very slightly to the upside.
We did, Eric. The fed cattle trade was up slightly last week, and that was in the face of a slaughter level that was up 4.2% year over year, one of our largest weekly kills of the year. So there was obviously demand for the meat and demand for the cattle, and the wholesale beef market was about flat week over week, but remained up about 3.2% year over year. So about the only weakness in the overall marketplace was the calf and yearling markets.
And visit about that since you bring it up. What was the disparity there? Why were calf prices a bit to the weaker side?
Well, some of this is seasonal on the calf market, but across the U.S. and in the winter livestock auction, we were down $2 to $5 a hundredweight on most of the steer calves. And in some of the yearling markets, we were off a little bit more, and that's a reflection, I think, in the short term of very muddy feedlot conditions. If we look back into early fall, it seems like some region of the U.S. cattle feeding area, whether it was Iowa, then the Southern Plains, then Kansas and Nebraska, and looping around, we've just had a sequence of muddy feed yards, and that's come to bear. And from a fundamental economic reason, cattle feeding returns, in our estimates, had one positive month, looking at total economic costs in 2018, and that has sort of come around enough months of red ink for cattle feeders to, besides the weather, take a little bit of air out of the calf and yearling market. And they cannot suffer losses every month, and they've done that for about a year now. So I think those economic forces have kind of come to bear on the calf and yearling market and Mother Nature in the short term here. And we put some pressure on those calf and yearling prices.
Will we see this turn to the better at some point, though, Jim? Once more, feedstuff prices are still manageable for cattle feeders. What needs to happen to improve that profitability?
Well, as you point out, Eric, the feedstuff cost profile, it's a little bit higher than a year ago, hay, et cetera, but the animal performance has been disappointing for feed yards. But, I think we're more of a sideways calf and yearling market as we get through sort of these pressure points. We look at the futures market, for example, and, the rationalization, kind of the normalization of calf and yearling, especially yearling prices compared to fed cattle prices, has been an ongoing trend for about 10 weeks now. If we look at the January futures, again, the January futures versus the June fed cattle, January feeder cattle, June fed cattle, that ratio, that premium for the feeder cattle has eroded in the futures market as it has in the cash market. And on a per head basis, it's down $30 to $35 per head. Again, putting us back more in line for cattle feeding returns to come back towards break even. So we're probably well through some of that adjustment process, but it's been a fundamental erosion of those feeder cattle prices relative to fed cattle prices has been part of our market here over the last several weeks.
So this will turn at some point.
It will, and I think we're really waiting into 2019. These relationships are very seasonal, and we're heading into some of the weakest time of year. So feedstuff costs stay low, and we're now to a point where we can lock in some profits on feeding cattle, which we hadn't seen in several months. So we seem to be turning the tide a little bit on the potential for feeding cattle and making a little bit of profit. Looks a little bit brighter to us in 2019 than it did in 2018.
Back to the demand side, and you noted that the boxed beef sector was relatively flat by and large for last week. Is there any chance that we will see some sort of bump upward there, albeit here in the midst of winter?
Well, the drivers underneath that boxed beef market at this time of year is that the rib starts to erode as we've gone through our peak demand, peak price time, heading into the Christmas holiday season. We really kept that stronger in the last couple of weeks. We normally are tipping that a little bit lower, and then we transition to the chuck and the round and some of the other parts of the carcass to carry us into the wintertime. So we're right in that seasonal transition. By the time we get into March and April, we will look again towards the spring demand. But in the meantime here, we're going to be working more sideways than up on the wholesale beef market. That doesn't mean as we get into early 2019 that we can't push up the fed cattle market. That often happens, but we do tend to mark time as we get close to this holiday season in the cattle and the meat markets, and then we look ahead to 2019 in terms of our demand profile.
In a moment, Jim, we want to come back to an article you have on the lmic.info website that looks at meat consumption and compares turkey consumption to that for beef, pork. But before we do that, the USDA on Friday put forth its latest export and trade data, which includes, of course, beef. What do the numbers say to us?
Well, these are the official numbers for the month of October, Eric, so they're a little bit dated, but they were positive for the beef sector. In terms of imports of beef, that was down for the month of October year over year by nearly 5%, and the beef exports were up on a tonnage basis by nearly 5%. Now, this does not include the variety meats and the hides, et cetera, which have been a bit of a struggle. But in our top three markets, Japan was up 10% year over year, nearly 11%. Our exports of beef to Mexico were up 3% year over year, and our exports to South Korea were up 17% year over year. So that 5% year over year increase is a little bit smaller gain than we've had, but clearly shows we're on track for a record large beef tonnage export year and record large value of those exports. Now, that's a bit of a contrast to the pork sector, which had their exports only up 1.5% year over year. And a bit of the good news in kind of the other sector is the chicken sector. Their exports were up 4% year over year. Doesn't sound like a lot. We've had to lower chicken prices dramatically to be able to move into these markets that will accept our chicken. Markets like Angola, Mexico, Iraq, these are very price-sensitive markets, and we've had to lower the chicken prices dramatically, but it's finally caught hold, and we're starting to see some tonnage move into the export channels as opposed to cold storage. So on balance, we would call this a positive report, especially for the beef sector. That demand component overseas has clearly been the bigger demand component compared to the domestic demand component in terms of keeping our cattle market glued together in the face of second largest beef production ever and record large total red meat and poultry supplies by a big factor in 2018.
And as we go report by report, and beef demand abroad continues to be at a strong level, this seems to perpetuate itself, and that's encouraging, Jim.
That's definitely encouraging, and we have very low unemployment in the U.S. The U.S. market is holding together very well on the beef demand component, especially at wholesale. We have a lot of featuring of beef still going on, and this export component has been, I think, consistently throughout, month over month, year over year, has been a pleasant surprise throughout 2018. And again, we're going to set a record level in terms of tonnage and value of beef exports.
Well, to throw some more numbers out there, and this is on the domestic meat consumption side. Again, an article you have at lmic.info drawing from USDA figures on consumption of beef, pork, and turkey. And it's interesting that turkey consumption seems to be on the decline.
Turkey consumption's on the decline. This time of year, we're very much in the whole turkey marketplace for the holidays. And that per capita consumption, and we step back and we look at the price and the consumption relationship, clearly demand for that whole bird has declined. But then when we step back in 2018, we also see that the deli meat demand, which is the driver through much of the rest of the year, that the sliced meats, et cetera, was very soft also. So we had a consumption profile that, we were up slightly on beef, we were up on pork, we were up on chicken, but turkey consumption actually declined in 2018. That's now 2 years in a row. And some of this, we think, Eric, is clearly the dynamic in the big holiday eating meals. We actually see a few more people having some of their holiday meals in restaurants. And maybe we don't make as big a turkey, et cetera, as we did a few years ago. So that turkey demand profile is very much a struggle for the industry. They've also struggled on the export front. So they haven't been able to export some of the leg products, et cetera, to Mexico that we have in recent years, trying to compete with there's been very much competition between the ham market and the turkey market, and we have seen maybe a little bit on balance, both domestic and foreign, that the ham has won out a little bit over the turkey in terms of the seasonal demand.
As far as what this portends for beef in the future, well, it seems to be once more favorable development.
It is. In the broader context of the holiday meals, it looks like we've not only shifted a little bit to ham, but also to some of the rib cuts, et cetera, as we've seen recently in the wholesale market, those holding up stronger compared to a year ago when they should be tipping lower.
Jim, we won't talk again until 2019, so happy holidays to you and yours, and many thanks for the comments right here.
It's been my pleasure, Eric.
He is Jim Robb, the director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center. And to remind you, that is a project co-sponsored by a number of land-grant universities, including Kansas State University. Jim, with those thoughts on the cattle market trends on this Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today. I'm Sarah Moyer. We now have an update on poultry research going on at the Department of Animal Sciences and Industry. 2 guests in today to help talk about what's going on and a couple different studies. And in to talk about them today are K-State meat scientist John Gonzales and K-State graduate student in muscle biology Stephanie Kruger. Good to have both of you on.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
John, would you like to go ahead and set up the story of how some of these studies came to be and why there was an interest in these particular areas?
Yes. So a couple of years ago, I would say probably 3 years ago, Dr. Dwayne Davis, who's now retired, Jim Nelson, and myself were working with a company to kind of look at running in the pig industry or in sow litters. Through that project, we kind of started to talk about, hey, how do you help these little pigs? And luckily, Dwayne Davis is a master of reading the literature, and so he brought me a journal article where there was a compound called nicotinamide riboside, which is a vitamin B3 analog. And what it really does is it increases energy in the muscle. But what that paper showed is that it increased muscle stem cell activity in mice. And so Dwayne had an idea that maybe if we gave this product to these little pigs, that maybe it would help with runt survival. And so what interests me about that article more was they did a performance test where they ran the mice on a treadmill and looked at how long it would take for them to become fatigued. That's also one of my interests as a muscle biologist, meat scientist, is delaying the onset of fatigue in livestock as they go to market. And so I ended up saying, okay, let me call this company up and see if they'll sponsor research. Of course, they said no politely. But then they did say that they would sponsor us as far as giving us as much product as we wanted to test in livestock species. And so we ended up having this project occur. And so Steph, when she worked with me as an undergraduate in my laboratory, she decided that she wanted to graduate, right? She had to have a project. And so we were doing another project where we were looking at muscle growth in chickens. And so we had some fertilized eggs left over. And so I told Steph, we have fertilized eggs. We have a nicotinamide riboside product. There is some indications that it enhances muscle stem cell activity. So let's inject it into these birds or developing embryos. So we ran some preliminary tests with her where we looked at different time points and found that day 10 of incubation was the best. And then we ran her real study that she used to graduate and will use also in her master's thesis, where we looked at the location where we injected the product and then also looked at how much to inject. And so I'll let her take over and tell you what the results are.
Yeah, so for our project, like you mentioned, our first one, we call our location study. And so that's where we either injected the product into the yolk or into the albumin of the egg. And so we also, for some of those eggs, did inject a control. So where are we injecting, as well as if we are injecting a control or our NR product. And so what we saw after we injected at day 10 of incubation, we would put those back into the incubator and then allow those to hatch. And then within 24 hours post-hatch, that's when we would euthanize those birds and then take all of our analyses. And so really the results that we found from that was that these birds, while organs weren't affected, their overall growth was not affected, and we did see increase in muscle mass from that study. And so after we did a few reps of that study, we moved on into looking at dose titration, or what would happen if we increase the amount of NR we injected into each of those eggs. So this is what we call our dose titration study, where we have done a few reps of that as well, where once again, this time we decided to inject solely into the yolk because from our first study, that's what we found was most effective to see that growth in muscle mass. So for this study, injected into the yolk, and then we injected at a control and then 3 different levels of that product. And so once again, we allowed these birds to hatch and then euthanized and took the same analyses, and where we once again saw similar results where injecting that product into the yolk of the egg did increase muscle mass. And so at our first 2 levels, we did see that increase, and we did see that after injecting potentially too much of that product, we see almost a drop-off in that growth where they didn't have as much of an increase in the muscle mass.
So with this product that helps promote muscle growth and in the poultry sector specifically is where you've been looking at it, then more is not always better, correct?
Correct. That's what we're seeing in multiple reps of our studies.
So thinking about why this study is applicable to the current state of the poultry market, why this protein in particular, this product is kind of attractive in that industry, would one of you explain why that's the case?
So when you look at the consumption trends of meat products throughout the U.S. and you go on the USDA and print off these graphs, which I've seen all semester from our graduate students, usually what you'll see is beef is, declined over the years. And so pork will be pretty static, I think, from where it's peaked. When you look at chicken, it's a line that seems to continuously be growing and doesn't look like it's ever going to drop off. And eventually it probably will, but so one of the things that we think about when we talk about meeting that demand is really how you're going to do that with what capacity you have right now to grow birds. And so, Steph and I have talked about this and really think about it. You can think about it 3 ways. You can either physically produce more birds. Talking with our partner who gives us the eggs to do the research on, that donates the eggs to us, they say there's really no way that you can have more birds or that the industry can produce more birds. The second way is you can either grow the birds faster, which we have not completed a live trial yet with these birds that we've injected, but maybe that could be one of the advantages, that these birds can get to market weights quicker, and then hence you can have increase in efficiency. And then the last thing you can do is physically just put more muscle on those birds. And so what we measured through the increases in the pectoralis major muscle or the chicken breast is that we are seeing that there are larger muscles at hatch, and so we hope that'll translate down the line to larger muscles on those birds when they go to market. And so pretty exciting considering we kind of just took a shot in the dark and injected something because we had to have a project and not anything that we thought would work. It's always the things that we just try out of the blue that ends up being the most exciting to us. So very exciting results.
Excellent. And some implications moving forward. What are the impacts of this research? One of you mentioned that you're applying for a patent with this product.
Yeah, so we last year filed a preliminary patent through K-Surf, kind of one of those things that I thought about in my career. I'm like, I don't think I'll ever do anything that's very patentable, but apparently this was. And so we combined and also joined forces with Dr. Chad Palk in grain science and industry and his undergrad student, Haley Recker, where we have that preliminary application. We have done some studies in pigs, which show some other advantages as far as average daily gain. The thing about the product that I think that's pretty interesting to both Stephanie and I and Dr. Palk is that the response is fairly consistent. We've had different size eggs. We've had lots of eggs. We've ran it 4 times, and it almost gives you the same response no matter what. And so just as the sun will come up every day, we at least know we'll get a 30 to 40% increase.
Usually it's about a 30% to 35% increase
in muscle mass in those birds. And so that's really a good, consistent response from that product. And so we're working right now with another industry partner to start to grow those birds out and see what advantages there are there. So we're in the stages, too, of thinking about how you commercialize the product, which is not, once again, anything that I thought I would be involved in, but that I'm learning a lot on how you take an idea, execute it in the lab, and then actually commercialize it. So we're heading down that road, which is very fun.
The connection there to grain science is worth mentioning. Poultry in general is connected to many other Kansas agricultural commodities. Of course, it's exciting as well for you to be involved, Stephanie. Why has this process been extra educational for you as you've been working on your master's?
Well, like he had mentioned, starting out in my undergrad, I really got involved in an honors program where I had no idea what research was. And so just jumping right into that, really starting as an undergrad, that's the whole reason why I'm here today and why I'm getting my master's now is because of all the things I got to learn and how much I enjoyed doing research as an undergrad. And so I think it's been super educational. While I didn't actually have any poultry background, I would say, I'm learning so much about that, as well as just how muscle growth can actually occur, as well as the industry and just how much it's needed. So I think overall it's been super educational. I really didn't think I would ever end up going to grad school for research. So it's been really a big change for me.
You're looking towards wrapping up your master's here in the future. Are you continuing with research, do you think, or what types of careers are you looking forward to?
Yeah, so I think I do want to continue on in the research field, potentially just in industry. I did get to talk to another company and where they work with chickens, and so hopefully that might be something I could look forward to working with them, or really another company in the research industry.
Exciting. Well, thank you both for coming on and sharing this update about exciting poultry research and something that hopefully producers can use in the future as the product and some of those intricacies with the idea and getting that commercialized for people to have it available will happen here in the future. Thank you both again.
Yeah, thank you.
That once again was K-State meat scientist John Gonzales and K-State graduate student in muscle biology Stephanie Kruger, both working on some poultry research in the Department of Animal Sciences and Industry. In addition to this work, there is more research with poultry at the Poultry Research Unit. It's housed near the dairy and swine units that are north of K-State's campus, those used, of course, for both teaching and research. Although poultry is not Kansas's most well-known product, there is an impact here at the university with the research that's being conducted. Stay updated on animal science research through the department's website. That's asi.k-state.edu. I'm Sarah Moyer, and we'll have more here on Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Agriculture Today continues now here on the K-State Radio Network. Eric Atkinson here. Well, former U.S. Secretary of Agriculture and longtime Congressman from Kansas, Dan Glickman, received an honorary doctorate degree from Kansas State University on Friday. The awarding of that doctorate approved by the Kansas Board of Regents earlier this year and is the highest honor that K-State can give. Mr. Glickman was nominated for this recognition by several current and former K-State administrators and faculty members, as well as several distinguished colleagues, including Senator Pat Roberts of Kansas, the president of the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, Peter McPherson, and the retired deputy administrator of the USDA's Food and Nutrition Service, Dorothy Caldwell. Glickman represented the state's 4th Congressional District from 1977 to 1995. During that time, he was a member of the House Agriculture Committee. That included 6 years as the chair of the subcommittee with jurisdiction over federal farm policy issues. In 1995, appointed Secretary of Agriculture by President Bill Clinton and served in that post until 2001. As Secretary, he administered farm and conservation programs, modernized food safety regulations, and forged international trade agreements to expand U.S. markets. Agriculture Today caught up with Secretary Glickman following the commencement ceremonies on Friday, where he expressed his gratitude for this recognition.
You know, to be recognized by a great global international university, maybe they could have found somebody better, but I'll take it. You know, it's a great thing. I'm very honored to have received it. It represents, I think, my commitment to food and agriculture over the years. And so I will certainly publicize it everywhere I can in my office and everywhere else.
As Secretary of Agriculture under the Clinton administration, you did interact with K-State.
Yes.
And even before that, actually. True?
That's right. Well, first of all, I had my friend Dr. Flinchbaugh, who was very free to give his advice to me about a lot of different things. But, yeah, you know, I mean, I was on the Agriculture Committee the entire time I was in Congress from 1977. And I worked with K-State on a lot of issues. In fact, I was very involved in the Wheat Genetics Research Center back in the mid-'80s. I helped get an earmark here for $100,000, which I understand has sprouted and germinated into something much bigger. And then you've done a lot of work on food nutrition side of the picture here, and that I have been involved with as well. So, I mean, and K-State does so many things beyond just agriculture, but the big thing, I think, is the quality of the science that's come out of this university.
And you had many discussions with personnel at K-State. You mentioned Dr. Flinchbaugh, for one, about agricultural policy proper, right?
Dr. Flinchbaugh was particular, Art Barnaby at K-State. I mean, there are a lot of people in different fields. And again, also in the food nutrition thing, which has become a very close interest to me about the relationship between diet, nutrition, and health. And K-State's doing a lot of work in that area as well. So, we have all these challenges, but none of them are impossible to deal with. I mean, I'm a big one. I believe that climate change is here. It's occurring. We've got to deal with it. But we have the scientific capability to, in fact, mitigate the impacts and adapt to it. And agriculture can be better once we do that. We spend too much time fighting about whether it's happening or not, and not enough about how we can deal with the problems, and I think we can.
You have clearly remained engaged in agricultural interests, a lot of other things as well currently. Bring folks up to speed on what Secretary Glickman is doing these days.
Oh, I tell you, I do more than I should, and maybe more than I need to do, but I've been very involved in this Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, which was created in the last Farm Bill. Secretary Vilsack appointed me chairman of that. It does a lot of independent, kind of cutting-edge research in agriculture. K-State has actually benefited from that. I've been very involved in global agriculture, Feed the Future initiative, USAID's work in the developing world, and I've done a lot in the world hunger area as well, so humanitarian disasters, and so I try to just keep my fingers across the board.
So what's your next venture in this area?
I don't know. I got to take my my honorary doctorate home and decide if I can market it in some way to start giving more speeches on agriculture. Somebody sent me a text today. It's very funny. They said, "Congratulations on your honorary doctorate. I have only one question for you. What's up, Doc?" I got to figure out how to answer that.
Congratulations on a recognition well-deserved, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Former U.S. Secretary of Agriculture and former U.S. Congressman from Kansas, Dan Glickman, once again bestowed an honorary doctorate degree from Kansas State University in ceremonies this past Friday. And Agriculture Today once again congratulates the Secretary for that. Next up is this week's edition of Tree Tales. And standing by with that, K-State Forester, Bob Atkinson. Bob?
Sonny Perdue, U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, recently visited Kansas as part of K-State's Landon Lecture Series. The theme of his message was leaving it better than you found it. A worthy goal, easy to articulate, and somewhat harder to realize. Our country faces significant issues in sustaining agriculture and natural resources. Many of them have been identified in the Secretary's Shared Stewardship Strategy. For forestry, these issues include catastrophic wildfire, invasive species, drought, and insect and disease epidemics, all of which we are experiencing in Kansas. Shared stewardship is rethinking our approach to addressing these problems. Perdue is directing the U.S. Forest Service to closely work with states like ours to collaborate across jurisdictional boundaries in a way we've never done before. From the Cimarron National Grasslands to our national wildlife refuges and all state and private lands in between, shared stewardship will develop strategies to address these issues based on three core elements: determining management needs on a state level, doing the right work in the right places at the right scale, and using the best available tools for actively managing our natural resources. Never before has there been such a need for active management of our woodlands and grasslands. Brian Furby, Regional Forester of the USDA Forest Service Rocky Mountain Region, has assured the Kansas Forest Service of a commitment to seeing shared stewardship make a difference in addressing these significant natural resource issues throughout this region, including the state of Kansas. This is Bob Atkinson with the Kansas Forest Service encouraging you to manage and care for the woodlands and grasslands of our state. You've been listening to another Tree Tale.
Many thanks, Bob. Remembering now to listen to the Agriculture Today podcast anytime you choose, simply visit agtoday.net. You can listen on demand or find links to subscribe to the podcast via your app of choice, agtoday.net. And this is Agriculture Today. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today. I'm Sarah Moyer, and it's time now for our weekly 4-H segment here on Mondays as usual. And a regular visitor on the program today will be talking about the ambassador training for Kansas 4-H. It's upcoming in 2019, and with us we have 4-H Youth Development Specialist out of Colby, Kansas, Deryl Waldren. Good to have you on, Deryl.
Thanks, Sarah. Good to be on.
The 2019 Kansas 4-H Ambassador Training will be February 22nd and 23rd. What's to be expected for this annual event?
Well, the purpose of the Kansas 4-H Ambassador Training, which began back in 1982, is to give county and district 4-H ambassadors that are selected by the different extension districts and counties the leadership, communication, and marketing skills that they need to better market 4-H locally back in their counties, in cooperation with the local extension staff. So we've been doing that since '82, and we have a variety of workshops and speakers to accomplish all of that.
What are some characteristics of a 4-H ambassador?
Well, they're teenagers, and usually in the 8th to the 11th grade, sometimes the 12th grade, and they are selected by a county selection process or a district selection process, and then they are invited to come to our training once a year and get the skills that they need to go back home locally to help grow the program in cooperation with local staff.
The theme this year is 4-H ambassadors go wild with leadership. How will the theme be carried out through the training?
Sort of a jungle theme. So, every year the planning committee, the Kansas 4-H Ambassador Action Team, works to come up with a different theme. And so we try to build the decorations and some of the workshop titles around this year with Going Wild with Leadership.
Speaking of workshops, there are some for youth and adults who attend the training. Will you describe some of those topics that will be focused on this year?
Yes, we have 6 different workshops for the youth, and we have 3 for first-year attendees, and the 3 that they're going to get are True Colors. The second one that they'll take is called Wild About Leadership, and it's some basic leadership skills. And the third one is on, we're calling it Elephant Communications. It's a basic communications course that they would get with some valuable skills that they will use later on throughout their 4-H career. For second year and above, meaning if you've been there once, you'll take 3 different workshops. And this year we have called Navigating the Jungle of First Impressions, and we will have a presenter talk about how first impressions are important and the things that you can do to make your skill set better for not only interviews, but for applications and all sorts of different things that you need to make a good first impression. We have another extension person who's going to be teaching about day camp craziness and all the different ideas that you would need to know to have a successful day camp in your county or district. And the last one is called Advanced True Colors. We give them the basic True Colors as the first year, and this is a follow-up to that so they can find out how to better use their primary color and work better with other color groups. The adults also have 3 different workshops, and this year we have a making quality video clips for 4-H, and that would be a part 1 and part 2, so they'll be able to actually make a promotional clip for their county or district back home. And then the last workshop for the adults is just called Advisor Tips and a roundtable discussion about how the program's operating in their local district or county.
So everyone who attends Kansas 4-H Ambassador Training will be learning something new. And 2 speakers are on the agenda as well. Will you describe who's coming in to talk to those ambassadors?
For mid-morning after the first 2 workshops, we have a speaker, Cassie Wandersee, and she'll be talking about planning for effective social media, because we know social media is so huge today to promote the Kansas 4-H program, and especially the ambassador program, and she'll be giving good tips on how to do that. And our keynote speaker, the topic will be on ambassadors, wild over leadership. So it's a general leadership title.
And where can ambassadors or county programs find full details about the Kansas 4-H Ambassador Training?
Well, the easiest is to go to the Kansas 4-H homepage, which is www.kansas4-h.org. So again, that's KANSAS4-h.org. On the right side, then, there's a What's Hot, so click on the What's Hot for ambassador training, and it will take you right to that homepage where it will also have links for you to register. Registration will go live about December 15th. All the information is there to read up on what's going to happen, but the link is not quite live yet.
So the span there of time where people can be registering is from about December 15th to February 10th. That's the cutoff for registration on the Kansas 4-H CVent system. And then the date of the training again is February 22nd and 23rd at the Rock Springs 4-H Center near Junction City. That's a good place to bring 4-Hers together. Why is it important to bring ambassadors together for this event?
They learn from each other. I mean, they have a chance to compare different experiences or things that they do in their counties or districts, and it's always good for them to learn the differences or the similarities. And it's also good for them just to meet other ambassadors and make new friendships and have a chance to socialize and expand their networks. We do have some fun things for them. On Friday night we'll have a dance, and they'll also be able to participate in games and other activities in the Indoor Activity Center. So we've got a lot of fun things to kick things off on Friday night, as well as a big group opener with some group builders and indoor games and things that they'll be doing Friday evening. Cost is $115, and I would like to mention that it would be good if before registering that people check with their local county extension office, because some counties may not be able to provide chaperones and or transportation, so it's always good to check before you register. And we also welcome anybody can attend, even if you don't have a county or district ambassador team. This is open for teenagers to come to it and learn some new skills. So it's open for even to counties that don't have a specific team set up for ambassadors.
And Deryl, a final note, the Fun Weekend couldn't be put on without some volunteers. Who helps collaborate to create the ambassador training?
Again, it's the Kansas 4-H Ambassador Action Team, which is a committee made up of teens as well as some extension agents and myself as a specialist to pull it all together.
Thanks for coming on and sharing about this opportunity, Deryl.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me on.
That once again was 4-H Youth Development Specialist Deryl Waldren, one of the collaborators on the Kansas 4-H Ambassador Training, which will take place in mid-February. Again, for more details, visit the Kansas 4-H website, kansas4-h.org. This concludes our 4-H segment for this week, and that's all the time we have for today. Tune in tomorrow for more. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Sarah Moyer, and you've been listening to Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.